Given that many people believe that the Chinese robotaxi technology is much better than what other automakers and some even say what Tesla has, Freda Duan, an analyst from Altimeter Capital, a large investor in Tesla, went to China for a week to test out all the different robotaxi vehicles there. We'll go over all her findings, but rest assured, she says nothing compares to Tesla's approach for end-to-end self-driving. While the Chinese brands perform well on main roads, they struggle on other road types. We'll also go over Elon Musk's recent comments about the next generation of full self-driving and the compute they need to perfect it. I've got Hans Nelson joining me. Hans has his own YouTube channel called Hans C. Nelson. Thank you, Hans.
Thanks for having me, Herbert.
This is full self-driving, and there's some new developments here, specifically about Elon's comments about parameters, and then we want to compare it to the Chinese because Freda Duan went there and compared it to what robotaxi is being done there. So that's the part I'm very excited about. So 12.4.2 was late, but it was finally started to be rolled out to at least non-employees, although it seems to be just a few at this point, just a handful. So what is happening? And so Elon's explanation for that, he says, sorry for the delay. This release had far fewer interventions, but suffered in driving smoothness. Part of the issue was too much training on interventions and not enough on normal driving. It's like a doctor training too much on patients in the emergency room versus training on preventative care. So when they launched 12.4, we were all expecting a huge jump. And the way I'm interpreting what he's saying is that, yes, there was a jump in interventions, but they forgot to train it enough on just normal driving. So there's now issues. He says, our next gen AI model after this has a lot of promise. 5 times increase in parameter count, which is very difficult to achieve without upgrading the vehicle inference computer. So I want to ask you what he meant by that. He then said, yeah, so long as information compression efficiency is held reasonably constant, a higher parameter count is a representation of how well it understands the nuances of reality. Can you explain what he's saying?
Yeah, so parameter count is just the number of basically little knobs that can be settings in the neural network. And this is something that we have seen, at very large effect in just the overall AI world, and especially in the realm of these large language models like ChatGPT. That the larger you make the model, the more parameters, and usually they're measured in billions of parameters or potentially even trillions of parameters, the more capable you can make that neural net system. It can understand the complexities and the nuances of reality, of language, at a deeper level. And then they can, when you run those models, they can have a, just higher quality set of output. And so what he's saying there is that there's a level right now of compression that's possible. You can take, we'll say, trillions of gigabytes worth of video data, and you can get a model to accurately reflect the nuances of all of that data in we'll just say a constant size model. For instance, maybe it's several gigabytes worth of model weights is what it ends up being. That's a very large compression to get trillions of gigabytes of video data to be understood, like the deep level understanding of that data in a few gigabytes worth of numbers. And if that ratio of the input data size to the model size is held constant, then you need a bigger model in order to get better levels of understanding. And over a short time frame, that's what you basically have, that you're not really improving the amount of compression that you can do. You can't have a better understanding with a smaller model size until you do things to improve your architecture, or you've got to get really creative and figure out ways in order to change that ratio. And so I think that's one of the things that Tesla's working on. And it looks like 12.4 is an experiment where they said, okay, these are the issues that we're having, and we're going to put more of those pieces of data into the data set that trains the model. And if we want to have the same model size, then we're going to take out some of the normal driving data so that we can still have the same total total size of the data set that's being used to train. And so they played with the ratio. They said more intervention data we're going to train on to do less of that, but it's going to come at the cost of not having quite as much normal driving data. And so while they were able to actually achieve their goal of reducing interventions, it also meant that the normal driving smoothness
Hmm.
and a lot of the things that are very important to customers as far as customer experience and having confidence in the vehicle, making sure that you understand it, it's not doing things that, while safe, are annoying or frustrating. Um, and so I think this is just a big learning experience for Tesla. No one has really solved this problem all the way. And so trying to figure out the exact correct composition of the data training set that you need is part of what it takes to solve this problem. And Tesla's right there on the forefront of trying to do that. I'm really glad that they've done this experiment, and now it gives them more information about, okay, the next one, how do we solve that? And so the fact that they are doing a larger model, that is going to be a difficult model to fit onto hardware 3, at least at first. There's things that they can do over time, I think, to try and get that model to run well on hardware 3. And we'll just have to see how Tesla handles that
Yeah.
back and forth and those engineering compromises and challenges. But when he did say difficult, he didn't say impossible. So I think it may take us a little bit longer now to go from 12.4 into 12.5. Like, they're going to continue to work on 12.4. I think it will roll out to more and more customers. They'll solve some of these issues. It will probably be better in a lot of ways, but still have, two steps forward, one step back. It'll still, like, I don't know that 12.4 will ever be better than 12.3 in the specific areas of smoothness that 12.3 was exceptional in. Um, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. They can try and fix those problems ultimately in 12.5 and beyond.
Hmm.
But it may take us a while for them to figure out how to get 12.5 out into the hands of customers, because if it is a much bigger model, they're going to have to do new things that they haven't done before in order to get that to run well on the fleet of hardware 3 vehicles. And we don't have the computer up and running in Austin that is supposed to be this dedicated system that is making FSD work specifically for hardware 4 computers and hardware 4 sensors, and have this special hardware 4 stack. So, right now, even the hardware 4 vehicles are going to have to run this hardware 3 version of the software. And so I think that's, for the time being, going to be something that slows us down a little bit. But like we said, these are engineering challenges. These are all solvable. This is part of the learning process. And I think that it shows, part of it is how difficult it is, but it also shows how exceptional Tesla's team is in being able to, like, no one else is doing this learning right now. And so everyone who is observing this space is learning how
Hmm.
to approach
Yeah.
this problem in the long run
So
from what Tesla's doing.
sounds like that they're still learning, which is like, they're still trying to figure out how to do it right. That's the part that I think was a bit of, we were hoping that they'd already knew how to keep iterating. Omar says this: it feels like Tesla's struggling to learn how to iterate on FSD with the new end-to-end architecture. It seems to be difficult to drive down the error rate while also preserving all the positive aspects of the driving model. The process of iterating on FSD is now very different. Ash Martian asks the question: are they able to validate and test the model's performance in a simulator? Yes. So this is another separate thing that we saw out there. This photo came out, and Charles Thiang says, thanks, Elon, for leading the liquid cooling technology to large AI data centers. This may lead to preserving 20 billion trees for our planet. We see this photo, and it just shows you that there is a large AI data center. This is a nice photo we haven't seen before, and they're talking about liquid cooling technology. So this could be what they're training FSD on, and this is what we're waiting to get up and running, right?
Yeah, I think that, in all likelihood, this is the new data center that's being built in Austin in the extension. And I think we had heard that they were going to do some liquid cooling on it. And so, that allows them to operate these training and inference training computers at much higher clock rates, and really pushing the limits because you can cool them much faster. But I mean, this is one of the world's largest supercomputers that you're talking about here. It's not but it's up there. And I think it's probably, from the sound of it, potentially going to be the only one of its size with liquid cooling, which is very groundbreaking and a very difficult technical challenge to solve once again. And the purpose of having this is, once again, to go back to what I said, this whole system is going to be set up to train models specifically for hardware 4 that take advantage of the extra speed and power of the hardware 4 computer compared to hardware 3, but also, all of that is going to be processing data from the better cameras that hardware 4 has, which have a much higher data output. And so you have to have higher bandwidth in order to process all the pixels that are coming in on these much higher resolution cameras. And those models, I think, give Tesla back some headroom. I think, while it's there's quite a debate among technical people about, is hardware 3 going to be capable of the Robotaxi version of full self-driving once we finally get to that point. There are strong people in both camps. James Douma definitely says, or leans on the side that we don't know what the upper limit of hardware 3 is, and that you can usually expend more engineering time in order to get more performance out of old hardware like that. And so it's very possible, at least, that hardware 3 can in fact be a robotaxi capable hardware platform. But in the process of getting to that point, it's nice to have a set of hardware that has lots of extra room to explore and do things and try new things, use bigger models to begin with, and then potentially over time shrink those, maybe faster speeds or whatever the case may be. It allows them to do more experiments faster at a higher level to find the actual solution that is robotaxi. And then once they have that, then they can go to work on really refining the quality of that solution and trying to make it backwards compatible to the hardware 3 vehicles, if we can't get to that robotaxi version with hardware 3 to begin with.
Thank you for explaining that comment about hardware 3 versus hardware 4. We'll see what happens there, but appreciate that. I want to get to Freda Duan. So Freda Duan is an analyst that works for Altimeter Capital. Brad Gerstner, yeah, he's well known. He was always on the All In podcast. He's an investor, early investor in Uber. He Altimeter Capital started investing significantly in Tesla, and Freda Duan has been doing tremendous work, doing research, almost like what ARK Invest does. In some cases, even better. So here's what she said. Freda said, "I just finished a 1-week trip to China. I've now survived all the major, about 20 L2 self-driving and robotaxi vehicles in both the US and China." So she's tested out this self-driving tech that's out there. Some thoughts and observations. So first she said, I've tested major brands like Huawei, Li Auto, NIO, Xiaopeng, and Xiaomi. Overall, they exceeded my expectations. The rides were not overly cautious and handled complex situations. Yes, the road conditions in China are very challenging quite well. Okay? So it speaks highly of the Chinese robotaxi and full self-driving. Nothing compares to Tesla's approach, though. I see imitation learning end-to-end as the only effective approach for self-driving. She's pointing out that none of these guys have yet, a couple of them, I think, Huawei and Li, have started using
And I think
neural nets. Xiaopeng. While Chinese peers perform well on main roads, they struggle on frontage roads due to reliance on the high-precision maps and rule-based methods. So this is LiDAR, and they're still using code. They're not yet switched to neural nets. And so, yeah, they look like they're doing really well on the main roads, but it's not really, like it's kind of almost kind of limited what they can actually do. Cars stopped in the middle of the road when there was no clear white lining. Okay, so that's, an issue. Chinese electric vehicle self-driving capabilities are far ahead of those from US and Europe brands. She's talking about the other brands outside of Tesla. I doubt any Chinese players can profit from L2 self-driving, though. Wow. Not because it's not useful, but because it's hard to differentiate, and price wars dominate the market in China. It's almost like a table stakes. You have to have this. in China. Chinese consumers and regulators seem much more receptive to self-driving. Even with a 5 out of 10 self-driving capability, cars are practically hands-free. Insurance-wise, for L3 plus cars, OEMs bear responsibility for incidents. So OEMs avoid labeling cars as L3 plus, level 3 plus. So before I move on, thoughts on what you've read there?
Yeah, one of the things that it's good to hear from her is just her experience with those Chinese products that really kind of reflects that they are similar in a lot of ways to the other robotaxi systems that we have here in the United States that are operating by, companies like Waymo and Cruise, that they are exceptional, potentially in the areas where they can operate, but they have limited areas of being able to function, and they aren't necessarily things that can extend to other areas very well. And those hard, like having the sensors, the lidar sensors, and relying on handwritten human code, both of those things just create challenges that are very, very difficult to overcome. And that is still the case in China, the same way it is here in the United States, that no matter how good they can get a specific route or a specific city, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can take that and then move it to a new place and have it work well. And it requires a lot of effort to get each and every one of those areas working properly. So to hear her comments basically say that, until these companies can really adopt the Tesla approach all the way, that they just have a cap on how good they can
Yeah.
be and how much they can operate. And one of the other things that, just is seemed to be generally true to this point, I expect it to continue to be generally true moving forward, at least for the foreseeable future, is that, China is great at implementing technology that exists. They're exceptional at it, and democratizing it and making it available to, large numbers of people. But they still have a difficult time being at the very bleeding edge of developing new technology. And, I think that is the thing that puts them at a disadvantage when it comes to Tesla, is that even the Chinese players that are now trying to adopt vision only and neural networks, they're doing so while trying to imitate and follow Tesla. None of them are really pursuing a completely original strategy and trying to do something that no one else has ever done before.
Yeah.
And that
But
just puts them on the back foot.
to be fair, it's not the Chinese. It's everybody versus Tesla.
True.
Everybody, even the Europeans, even the Americans. If you're not Tesla, you were doing it wrong. So she's clarified and confirmed that that is what she sees even in China. So now let's talk Robotaxi. So she goes, I tested major brands like Pony AI, Didi, and Baidu. I'd rate Pony AI equal to Waymo, and it's ahead of other peers. Okay, so that's a first step. And we've been hearing that Baidu was well ahead because they're relaunching to 2,000 cars. But we found out that the Baidu full self-drive, like the self-driving general manager said he'd be interested in partnering with Tesla. But Pony AI is equal to Waymo, and it's ahead of other peers. However, the same issue applies here. User experience is nearly perfect in this city. But expansion is the real question. So it's the same thing with Waymo. Chinese robotaxi companies are very sophisticated. While the rest of the world focuses on technology, the Chinese peers treat it as a product, considering unit economics, operations, mass productions, etc. Interestingly, most companies express a preference not to operate fleets themselves. They aim to be asset flight and let fleet managers handle the operation. So that part I never knew about that. And in terms of policy, China has a very clear approval process driven by data, autonomous driving distance, fully driverless distance, intervention rate, passenger ratings, etc. So it looks like that the Chinese government's really supporting it, and the Chinese technologies is there, but again, very, very limited. Still, it's put it this way. Everybody thought, have you not heard that the robotaxis in China, they're already doing it? Well, it turns out after being tested, they're the same as Waymo. They're the same as what others are doing. They're still LiDAR based. They're still code based. They still have the same limitations. So while it appears that they're able to do it, it still is very limited.
I would agree with those points, and I also, really like the information that she provided there at the end about the Chinese government having a very clear approval process based on data that allows companies to begin to operate these robotaxi services. And that's a good thing to hear, because I think Tesla will be in a great position once they are able to, get their FSD fleet operating in China to collect the necessary data to be able to provide to the regulators to get that approval process kickstarted. Um, I think they're, like we said, the advantage that they have is a system that is able to scale relatively quickly, once they have that first iteration of the neural net operating there locally. And so that should, continue to be an advantage even in the Chinese market relative to the existing players that are there.
And then so from everything I've just read, and my interpretation is that they're going to be partnering with Tesla. It's not like they're already equal to Tesla. It's not like they're far ahead. Looks like that, and they want to, hand it off to fleet managers. It is something they need to do, as you can explain here. It's table stakes. There's the competition is so strong there that each one, somebody will partner with Tesla, get ahead, then the others will have to copy and try to match it immediately. That's what I saw. So we'll see if I'm right. But now she spends a lot of time looking at Chinese electric vehicles, just electric vehicles. Now here, Chinese is really far ahead, maybe even equal, maybe even better than Tesla. I don't think they're better than Tesla, but they're taking a different approach. So Chinese EVs in major cities like Beijing or Shanghai, electric vehicle adoption, the green license plates versus gas cars with blue license plates, seems to be about 40% plus. Okay, that's huge numbers. If 40% of cars on the road are electric vehicles, then electric vehicle penetration, defined as the percentage of new car sales, must already be over 50%. We were predicting, and from the stats, that it was going to hit 50% by about now. Yeah, June. So I think that this is actually right. In shopping malls, the ground floor is filled with electric vehicle showrooms, easily 10 or more brands, many of which are unfamiliar Chinese brands. It's like a red ocean. It's like there's so many of them. Many of them will die. It appears almost too easy to make an electric car, which is a stark contrast to the US. Xiaomi, for example, can achieve a 10% gross profit margin in its first year of operation compared to Rivian's negative 45%. Additionally, Xiaomi cars are priced at 30% of Rivian's price. So electric cars, they can make them. They can make them profitable. And there's so many of them. It's fascinating to see how China transitioned from couldn't make their own gas cars at all, only joint ventures, to dominating electric vehicles globally. That was fast. The government deserves credit for setting the direction and executing effectively. China now controls the entire supply chain, with cattle batteries, right, holding 40% of the global market share. This is their battery maker is holding 40%. So how did this happen? And she said, well, incentives were set just right. The government provided incentives early on to make electric vehicles and gas cars have comparable MSRPs sold at the same price, allowing consumers to choose based on functionality. This approach differs from how the IRA offers incentives. When China wants to do something, they did it right, and they, full force of the government to support this. Perfectly competitive market. Tesla was brought in and competition was welcomed, unlike the US, which is 100% import tax on Chinese EVs. And of course, they're actually fighting Tesla. It's terrible. So strategic regulations, license plate restrictions were used effectively. So example, taxis and minivans are required to be electric vehicles. Wow. So the challenges, though, despite the success, the industry faces challenges with low margin companies and struggling stocks. Many of them will die. Red ocean, bloodbath. The intense competition shows no signs of ending. Well-funded global OEMs and Chinese state-owned car companies continue to subsidize, leading to new electric vehicle brands emerging annually. The natural tendency in China is to race to the bottom. I think this ties back to China's history as the world's factory, where manufacturers price products at cost plus versus the US and developing countries, which price based on affordability and value creation. Here's the interesting part. She said, a tremendous amount of features, because it's a bloodbath, they need to load it up with tech. Software features that surprise me the most. Everything in a car can be voice controlled, not just simple tasks like playing music. Users can adjust the height of the steering wheel and set the temperature easily. Self-parking, which Tesla has yet to release to all FSD users, is already table stake in China. I'd rate the quality of the self-parking as 10 out of 10. And then they even have things like mini fridges in the car, infotainment systems, remote access to the car, to the cell phone, heads-up displays, UV-protected glass roofs. Xiaomi took Tesla's design, but the glass roof of the car is made of double layers with silver, blocking 99.9% of UV and infrared rays. Heat is no longer a problem inside the car. Wow. So there's some videos here. I've only got one that I can play, but we've seen many of these. These cars look pretty good. This is pretty decent. In this case, I think I'm looking at 3 different screens. So it's not just this one screen in the middle. Like there's like screen galore, tech galore. What do you think, Hans?
It's so fascinating just to see how much innovation and just development the presence of a highly competitive marketplace brings to products that consumers end up getting to have access to. And, we just have not had a super highly competitive auto market where, and when I say highly competitive, a market where startup companies have a chance at succeeding, I think is a key in that if the only competitors are existing, players who have been in the market for a long period of time, the incumbents, then they just get stuck making products the same way that they've always made it if they don't have to be on the lookout and defend themselves against startups. And that is, for better or for worse, regardless of how you view the way that the Chinese government handles markets, they have used, at least in the area of automotive, where this is a national priority, the power of markets to drive very rapid and very massive development of this industry. And the consumers are the ones in the end that are benefiting, that they have access to just a host of choices and they can decide for themselves what features it is that are the most important to them. And then on top of that, the focus of the government to really dominate the battery supply chain, that their support of CATL and BYD also does batteries. These local companies that have really vertically integrated themselves into the battery supply chain and develop the best low-cost batteries in the world at this point in time. Chinese LFP cells are the go-to affordable batteries for vehicles in the world, and that includes for Tesla. So just the strategic nature of the way that they have pursued this opportunity, and then their very creative way to use markets to drive this development and provide opportunities to startups to, okay, hey, you don't have to figure out the battery piece. CATL has that pretty much covered for you, and they're willing to supply anyone and everyone with pretty high quality batteries. And so giving that as the foundation for homegrown Chinese startups to get into this market, has just bred this environment of competition that has produced some great things. And I'm excited for what that is going to mean for the global fleet of electric vehicles over time. It is going to be disruptive, but it is ultimately, I think, going to be a good thing for consumers. But it will mean a lot of carnage for people that this used to be their business and they are no longer able to keep up because they're not used to having to deal with this type of competition.
So giant thank you to Freda Duan of Altimeter Capital. We love a lot of her deep dive. She explains all the different reasons how different car makers are approaching Robotaxi, how they're approaching the technology, the hardware, the software, even the data. She went down that list, and she clearly still believes Tesla is far ahead of everyone else. She now tested the Chinese brands, able to give color of what's actually truly happening on the ground there. So thank you to Freda. Thank you, Hans. Your knowledge in this space is unmatched as well. So appreciate you. Follow him on his YouTube channel, Hans C. Nelson. Thanks, Hans. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.